smoke machine that's just keeping us from looking at the conspiracies that we can prove, that investigative journalists have proved, that are out in the open, like Trump saying, give me $1 billion to the oil companies and I'll roll back environmental regulations that will drive more hurricanes to your front door, everyone, right? Or Elon Musk, whose entire business model is just about getting, subsidies from the government and, buying a platform that one man should never have been allowed to own, our information commons. Of course, they want us distracted with this nonsense, because if we weren't distracted with that, then that deep sense that something is not well and that we really have deep problems to solve would be directed up at them. So they always have to direct it down. That's also why we have to be concerned about Trump. He will always direct that. He will harness that rage and he will direct it at the most vulnerable.
Naomi Klein, professor of climate justice, University of British Columbia. Her book is just out, Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. It's in paperback.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarlane, host of The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 90.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Thanks to all the listeners at KFAI and those who are joining us across any of our social media platforms. We're streaming this program to Black Press USA, the website of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, also to the Insight News YouTube channel. We're also available online right now through LinkedIn, through Twitter, and through Facebook, a couple of Facebook platforms. Wherever you're connecting, we thank you for being a part of today's program. We promise, we believe we'll deliver robust conversation. Two things on the agenda today, on everybody's mind all the time right now, is obviously the election. We're going to dive deep into the question of what and where the interest of African Americans, really of all Americans, lie as we consider the question of faith, religion, and how do we parse out the information, I would say disinformation, that is characterized by the concept, the phrase of white Christian nationalism. What is it? And what does it mean for Black people, Black Christians? What does it mean for true Christians? We'll get into that for most of the program today. My colleague and friend, Reverend Alfred Babington Johnson, has helped curate a collection of powerful minds, powerful leaders in the field of community, of religion, of churchmanship. And we'll talk about that in light of the election coming up in a few days. Before that, though, I want to talk about an important event coming up this Saturday. I'll be a part of it. It's the third conference on building wealth in the Black community put on by Build Wealth Minnesota. And this is an event that continues important conversations about creating wealth in the Black community. It's called the Black Men's Legacy Summit #3. It's taking place this Saturday, October 26, 2024, from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. in North Minneapolis at the Regional Acceleration Center. It's on the corner of Plymouth and Penn. We in community call the building the Thor Building. And joining me to talk about this important event are two of the presenters for this Saturday's program. One is Jamy Barreau, and another is Arthur Ray McCoy. Brother McCoy, Brother Barreau, welcome to the conversation. Good to see you both. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let me do this first and have you both introduce yourselves and your professions and what messages you'll be bringing to the community as we discuss wealth and wealth transfer, generational wealth in the Black community. Brother Ray, let me go to you first. Talk about your company, what you do, and what you'll be bringing to our audiences in this important summit coming up this Saturday?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Ray McCoy, and my firm is McCoy Legal Services. I'm an estate planning attorney, and basically what I'm going to be talking about at the summit this weekend is the importance of estate planning, wills, trust, healthcare directives, basically two big questions: how to plan for a period of incapacity, and then how to transfer assets to your loved ones when you die. This is a topic I think that most of the folks in the Black community have had little opportunity to engage in. So we want to come and talk about why it's important, regardless of the size of your estate, to be concerned about these questions.
Jamy Barreau, thank you for being here as well. You're an attorney as well. Would you introduce yourself and your company and talk about what you'll be presenting, focusing on at the summit this Saturday?
Yes, my name is Jamy Barreau. Thank you again for having me. I'm the managing attorney of Barreau Legal and an adjunct professor teaching trust and estates and probate law. I focus my practice on trusts and estates. And this Saturday, I have the pleasure of speaking specifically about probate law and how to avoid probate, right? And to kind of echo what Mr. McCoy was saying, our community, unfortunately, there's a lack of education, a lack of knowledge, and perhaps an apprehension of talking about these sorts of topics. And I hope that, together we can provide some more knowledge, provide some more education to really avoid some pitfalls in the future.
The event is the Black Men's Legacy Summit 3. The subtitle is Reclaiming Control of Our Future. This organization, Black Men's Legacy Summit, actually it's Build Wealth Minnesota, that's the name of the sponsoring organization, is led by David McGee and Jeffrey Robinson and a team of people that have a history of helping individual families move from a place of lack into a place of power by becoming homeowners, by understanding wealth, by becoming literate about financial matters. And the more they do, it becomes obvious the more is needed. Let me ask you both to sort of explain why is it that there is a lack of knowledge and what this kind of initiative means for moving the ball forward for our community. Brother Ray, you first, please.
Sure. If you think about it, I think many of us have been concerned that we don't have to worry about estate planning because we don't have assets to transfer. The fact of the matter is, organizing this process allows us to make sure we can take care of ourselves as we age, as we deal with incapacity, and that we can smoothly transfer whatever we have to our loved ones when we die. I think that I can just give you the example of my father who said, hey, look, I'm not going to worry about that. I want you to take care of it. But he didn't want to really engage in the details of how this process worked. And because it can, regardless, again, of the amount of assets that you have, can cause a great deal of conflict for the folks that you leave behind. In my mind, it is just paramount that we at least begin to talk about how we put together an estate plan that can address those two big questions. One, who makes choices for me if I become incapacitated and can't do that for myself? And two, how do I want assets to transfer when I die easily and without the complications of probate and things of that nature?
And so, Jamy, what are the complications of probate? What does that mean? What does probate mean? And how does it show up in our lives? If we are unsophisticated, uneducated, unaware, and we decide that when we go, that whatever happened, right? Whatever happens will happen. What disservice have we done to this idea of legacy, to the ones that we're leaving something to? And why is it that we don't know? And what will happen differently when we do know?
Yes. Well, probate is essentially the core process by which we, in very, very simple terms, transfer the assets of someone who's passed away over to the next in line, right? Whether that be, the spouse or the children or, maybe even cousins, right? The next of kin. And, if you could imagine, court already could be an expensive and prolonged process. It's very, very similar with probate court, right? Generally, you could look at a time frame of, 12 to 18 months, depending on what state you're in, handling your probate in. And so if you could imagine during that time, that's court fees, that's attorney's fees. There could be bickering amongst family members about who should get what and how much should each person get. And to add to Mr. McCoy's point, not only are we concerned in estate planning about how we manage things during our lives, but also it's a chance for us to guide assets after we pass away, whether you have a lot or whether you have a little, right? You worked hard for it all your life, you should get a chance to transfer that yourself. And so, this, and no matter what we have to pass on, we focus on a lot more during probate as well, right? If you can imagine, this is the time where final expenses are being paid, whether it's funeral costs, final bills, credit cards that were left behind. Any lawsuits can be continued during the probate process in the name of the person who passed away. So, for instance, if there was an allegation of wrongful death, right? The probate is typically open so that your loved ones can proceed and kind of get vindication on your behalf. And so, through estate planning, you can minimize not only the time or the need for it, but also, you can minimize the amount of bickering, right? So, for instance, you get to choose your executor or personal representative. And, if you left that unchosen, guess what? The state could choose for you, right? So it's all important to have these things documented ahead of time.
Do we lose money if we don't act in a way that's planful? Is it possible that, assets, fortunes, resources end up going to the state or going somewhere other than to who you would think would be the natural recipients of someone's transition? Is that a danger? Do we end up losing? Does a family lose if it doesn't pay attention?
Well, potentially, right? I mean, really, what I like to tell folks is failing to plan is having a plan to fail, right? And so if you don't choose where you want your assets to go, the state is going to choose for you. And so typically what that's going to look like is it's going to be next of kin. But if you're in a very, very rare situation where you don't have a next of kin, right? Your family line is, let's say, extinguished, right? Let's talk about in that hypothetical. Well, chances are the next in line would be the state to inherit your assets. We call that escheating to the estate. So while that's not very likely, and in full disclosure, the state does not want our assets, right? But if there's literally no one left, that's where it would go. But I'll take it a step further and say that if you didn't have proper planning, you do open up your estate to certain liabilities in terms of estate taxes, right? And so with proper planning, you could avoid or at least limit the estate's exposure to estate taxes. And in full disclosure, you have to have a certain amount of assets to be, in danger of being liable for estate taxes. But the point is, without a plan in place, you could be exposing the state to liability. And then later on, that's minimizing the amount of money, amount of wealth that's saved for generations to come.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm talking with, you just heard, Jamy Barreau, an attorney who is going to be talking this Saturday at the Black Men's Legacy Summit 3, happening and presented by the Black Wealth Minnesota. It's happening this Saturday from 12 noon to 4 o'clock at the Thor Building at the corner of Plymouth and Penn. That's this Saturday, October 26th. Also, you heard from Arthur Ray McCoy, another attorney. And let me ask you both in closing this segment out, gentlemen, thank you for being here. What I hear a lot, and I want to say it because it's part of the title of this Saturday's program. The title is Generational Wealth Transfer. In the past year or two, it seems this whole notion, the language of generational wealth is surfacing in the Black community. I mean, I saw Tiffany Haddish on a public show, like maybe Jay Leno, or not Jay Leno, but one of the talk shows, declaring that her drive is generational wealth. Now, that probably has always been the case in our history, but we've never heard it spoken so clearly and so confidently as we're beginning to hear it now. What do you gentlemen, you brothers, say is the level of awareness in our community, and where are we headed? I believe we're headed in the right direction, but what are your comments, and how do we both incentivize, motivate, expand knowledge and power about generational wealth? And that is as opposed to some of the languages we grew up with, basically discouraging the idea of money and wealth. What do you think, Brother Barreau? And then let you close out, Brother McCoy.
Well, I'm very optimistic about our conversation about generational wealth. I don't know what to attribute that to. Maybe it's a shift in generational thought, but I'm encouraged. I'm very, very hopeful that we are getting more educated in the topic. I'm seeing more and more clients come in, recognizing, hey, I have these assets, I have my home, I have these rental properties, I have my bank accounts, and I want to build something for my children. I want to build something for my grandchildren. So I think the conversation, I'm glad to hear that celebrities of Tiffany Haddish's stature are out there discussing these things, because I truly believe knowledge is power. And as we get the word out there, I think more and more of us are going to start falling in line and making sure we preserve generational wealth.
Brother McCoy, your thoughts?
Well, I attribute a part of this discussion regarding generational wealth to the fact that there are a number of cities and states that are now currently engaged in conversations about reparations, as is the city of St. Paul. And I happen to be one of the 11 commissioners appointed to the St. Paul Reparations Commission. And what cities, states, the country is reckoning with is the fact that it is necessary for us to repair the legacy of slavery that has kept Black people out of the ability to transfer wealth from one generation to the next. As these conversations continue around the country, the result will be that there will be a transfer of wealth from to the Black community, and therefore we need to be thinking about how we can make sure that our loved ones can inherit that wealth and use it to, again, continue to try to destroy this legacy of slavery that has kept us out of this process for so many decades.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much for being here today. I look forward to working with you, being with you this Saturday at the Black Men's Legacy Summit 3. It's happening from 12 noon to 4 o'clock, Saturday, October 26th, at the Thor Building on the corner of Plymouth and Penn in North Minneapolis. We're talking about wealth. Well, gentlemen, too, you're welcome to stick around for as long as you can. I know you're busy with your clients, but if you want to stay, please do. We want to pivot the conversation to a related issue, and that's the issue of political power. Right now, we're looking at an election that is historic in terms of its potential consequence. You use the term of a reckoning. A reckoning is at hand. And I'm pleased to have members of the clergy join me for the balance of the program to talk about some of the critical issues that the community is facing as it looks at the election coming for November. Let me bring in Alfred Babington Johnson. Brother Babington, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation. And let me have you introduce the rest of our colleagues and bring them in as well, and set the stage for the conversation, because you all are wrestling with how do we ensure that we are communicating broadly, properly, effectively in ways that invite, engage, and support understanding and the proper use of power at the ballot in our community.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Al. Let me invite in our brethren and sister, Superintendent McKinley Moore, who's the senior pastor of Jehovah Jireh Church of God in Christ, the Reverend Dr. Charles Gill, who's the pastor of Pilgrim Baptist, the historic Pilgrim Baptist Church in St. Paul, Reverend Elijah McDavid, who is the pastor of Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church in Minneapolis. We have Dr. Mevin Miller, who's the pastor of Progressive Baptist Church in St. Paul. And I hope my sister Shemeka Bogan is with us as well. Shemeka is our partner. She runs the Strong Roots Foundation. And let me just say, all of these brethren and others are part of His Works United, which is the ecumenical coming together of African-American churches in the state of Minnesota. And we have committed ourselves to advance of our village. And one key area of that, of course, is the area of political involvement and impact. And so, Al, this issue of African Americans and the vote is an interesting historic journey. As we begin having been acknowledged in the Constitution as only 3/5 of a person, and then as you come forward into the situation of slavery for hundreds of years, but from that and the Civil War come the amendments. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which outlawed slavery. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which allowed Black citizenship. But notwithstanding Black citizenship, the issue of the vote was not really institutionalized until the 15th Amendment, in which voting rights for Black people were put in place. Now, following that, of course, you have the Reconstruction period and Jim Crow area and the Black codes and all kinds of ways of limiting the involvement and the impact of Blacks in the voting exercise. And we have the Civil Rights Movement. Interestingly enough, at least very interesting to me, led by the African American Church. If you look at all the leaders of the Civil Rights Movement, there's somehow another Rev that came in front, whether that's Rev King or Rev Jackson, or Rev Lowry, etc. But so out of the Civil Rights Movement, it was largely generated by the fact that we need to be at the table around the rights that we should have been conferred upon us as to everyone else, but were denied. And voting was a way of trying to get into that conversation and change things around. And out of the Civil Rights Movement finally came in 1965, the Voting Rights Act. All the issues, whether it's literacy codes or poll taxes or guessing bubbles or whatever, all that forced us to this. So it was the church that was central to that. But we continue. The African American Church continues to be involved in that, and having a sense of obligation about being involved in that. So we have His Works United. We've pulled together our churches as what we call election beacons. And we have 25, 30 churches committed, more than that, but committed in this particular enterprise, working together with Shemeka and Strong Roots, and you'll be hearing about Souls to the Polls and all that kind of thing. And we meet weekly to talk about issues of various kinds. At our last meeting, we were kind of riveted by a development that kind of recognizes both the fact that the church is involved and people are concerned about spiritual matters, and the fact that there might be some distortion around that going on right now. And actually, we had our brother, Dr. Miller, put forward a phenomenon that is occurring. And I would like to have him, why don't you just share your thoughts, Reverend Miller, about this strange thing that is concerning us, particularly as religious leaders.
And before you do, let me ask all of our guests, each time before you speak, please say your name, because we see each other here on video for the digital, but our listeners on KFAI, let's make sure that we let them know by announcing our name before we speak each time. So, Reverend Miller.
Hello, my name is Mevin Miller. Certainly, thank you so much for having me on the broadcast today. And I want to thank His Works United for pulling all the pastors together and giving us a platform where we can kind of dig into these issues. I just raised the question as I surveyed my congregation and a number of young people trying to just get out the vote. And one of the things that came up, I think, a number of times was this idea, as odd as it may sound to some, that Trump somehow is God's elected servant. And what that does, it blocks any kind of meaningful discussion about real issues or any kind of meaningful discussion about, what his character or what his platform is. And it blocks any meaningful discussion about Vice President Harris's resume as well. So that was really the question that I raised, and we got into a weighty conversation.
Talk about it. I mean, I want to hear what were the pros and cons when somebody out of our community takes a position that Trump's victory is ordained. What do you do with that?
So Al,
yeah, go ahead.
The deal is the notion that there is this presumptive prophetic utterance about the campaign that says that God has stepped in to ordain such a one as Donald Trump in this particular instance to be the anointed one, raised a intense discussion among us about a variety of things. And I want the folk to weigh in, but we talked about everything from Christian nationalism to Reverend McDavid brought up even the evolution of the involvement of religion in politics. McDavid, why don't you share a little bit what you were thinking?
Good afternoon, Reverend Elijah McDavid from Fellowship in North Minneapolis. One of the things that I've noticed is I think over these past 30 years, we've seen the influx of white evangelical thought beginning to come in and enter our Black church spaces. And as the white evangelical movement that was very much courted as early as Reagan's administration and other Republican parties prior to this current term, we've seen their thought and their ethos and their political mindset begin to shape our context. And so now I'm hearing from a lot of folks in our congregations and our settings who say, well, I have to vote right because of my biblical values. People have distorted and made this assumption that, oh, the proper morality of our Christian thought says I have to vote this way because I'm concerned about, let's say, my views on abortion or on my views on human sexuality and rights for the LGBTQ plus community. My question to them has been, when did those become the only two religious or biblical values on which we choose to make a decision? What happened to other biblical values about welcoming the immigrant and how we treat those who are coming into our spaces and our country? Mm-hmm. What happened to how the Bible speaks about wealth inequality and how the wealthy are supposed to share with those who have less? Even about climate change, how do we honor the creation while also neglecting what is going on around us? So I think there's some other issues that we need to begin to speak to and remind people that just because what the right-wing media has defined as a Christian issue or a biblical issue doesn't mean that that should sway your vote holistically without you also having some other conversations about how you can see biblical values show up in a broad range of policy topics.
And Al, this prompted further discussion among us about other phenomenon of this political season and beyond that. One notion, the idea of Christian nationalism. this idea, again, just as McDavid mentioned, co-opting the religious proper space in some way and infusing it into this political thing. I think, Pastor Moore, I think you had some thoughts around that.
Yes, sir. I've shared, first off, yes, as far as Christian nationalism and this belief that America, was a godly nation, and we've got to get back to being, the godly nation. And as Pastor McDavid just shared, there's been many issues that America has imposed upon its people that were not godly. But what I share mostly with my church is that as the Christian mandate is Christ and the gospel of salvation. But we confuse that sometimes with our civic responsibility of community involvement, and particularly or specifically along the lines of abortion and Christian mandates that says we cannot, vote against a certain party because they stand against an issue like abortion. But I believe that you cannot mandate or legislate behavior or morality. My position is that that's what the Old Testament was. It was laws, and God himself abandoned the law for Christ and his gospel. So our message then is Christ and his gospel, not that we change laws to govern behavior, but that we change hearts. If we change people's hearts, we deal with that in the issue of changing hearts and not laws. Is how I see that.
Al, please
go ahead.
I'm burdened. I'm burdened by the co-opting or the attempt to co-opt the discussion and morality. And most recently, I think there was this rally, Prophets and Patriots. And the conveners of this was out of the whole Christian nationalist construct, but the conveners of it, first of all, the fellow by the name of Clay, Reawakening America Clark, who has been for years kind of convening this notion of activating Christian nationalism, but really placing it within a political campaign. So there's Clark, there's Eric Trump, who is one of the conveners of this, Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn. These are the core people, and a fellow by the name of Steve Schultz, that have these events, these what they call faith events. And in these faith events, these are the primary speakers, and they're promoting all the things that were just discussed here, the notion of the anointed one. So in this context, the current Republican nominee for the presidency is considered the anointed king. God help us. and they put forward with such fervor. They begin with praise and worship. And often Michael Flynn, who is not a clergyman, may deliver the homily briefly, pointing folks to passages and whatnots, but supporting this distortion of biblical principles to have people feel they're justified in supporting someone who embodies lying, fraud, taking advantage of other business people, selling tennis shoes and gold watches. This is the anointed king. In any event, these are things to be alert to. And Dr. Gill, you've been often involved from the point of getting the church and our communities out there in the political struggles. What say ye?
Well, in reference to this messaging that we have just started
say your
off.
name again, Dr. Gill, and your organization.
Yes. My name is Dr. Charles Gill. I'm senior pastor of Pilgrim Baptist Church here in St. Paul. As we started out with our conversation, as we began talking about how our messages have been co-opted and not just co-opted, but also limited to really just focus on maybe one or two things, of one or two biblical values, as opposed to looking at the whole breadth of biblical values that are not only established in the Old Testament, but also underscored and reiterated in the New. And for me, we just need to be clear about our own Christian heritage. And unfortunately, we are not as astute on our own Christian heritage as we ought to be. However, it does not mean that we cannot be. And with that, I really, a lot of it is locked in in our own African-American history and tradition. And unfortunately, we are not as sharp in those areas as we can be. But again, was here in the church, there are a great deal of biblical values that we need to be aware of, and also the values that are being pushed and promoted by the various political parties. We need to be mindful that that the person that is going to be sitting in that Oval Office is not going to be the president of one political party, or the president of Euro Americans, or a president of African Americans. They're going to be president of the entire United States of America, those that are in the church as well as those that are not in the church, and we need to be really mindful about that. And so there is so much at stake here that really weighs not just on the issue of democracy, but really almost the existence of every ethnic group that is throughout the entire United States of America. And it is important, therefore, that the church plays its major role in getting all of its members out that are eligible to vote to do just that, to vote enthusiastically and to encourage others to do the same.
Shemeka, talk about strong roots. Good afternoon and welcome. Good to see you as always. What is strong roots? What's the work, the vision?
Yes, good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Shemeka Bogan, and I'm with the Strong Roots Foundation. Our mission is really just to work with community. And so the idea behind that is, whether that's a faith-based community, whether that's, the activism community, whether that's the political community, kind of all of the different things that make up our community, that's what my goal and mission is.
So let me go back with a difficult question for all of you, for Babington, you and members of the panel. I fear that given their way, what I regard as the Christian right would be very comfortable with re-enslaving, and it could be slavery by another name, people like me. I feel that the intent and the aspiration is a longing for what they considered the good old days. And the good old days were days in which their power seemed unchecked. Their power was presented to them and to the world as manifest destiny. And they saw their relationship to me, an African American, as a steward, and they described my existence as less than fully human, or human being, childlike, and in need of direction being white thought, white privilege, and the notion that white people, white culture was in some level divine. That's my perception and my fear. Let me ask you, Babington, how do you respond to Al McFarlane raising the question in this frame?
Yeah, my response is, Al, you've proven to be the wise man I always thought you were. Your view of these things is incisive, insightful. But the tool, one of the major tools that is being foisted upon us is misinformation and disinformation.
So to what end? The misinformation to what end? And I want to take that question to give you and the colleagues an opportunity to define what is the Christian right? What is Christian nationalism? We're hearing the term more lately, and we should be hearing it more, but we need a working definition of white Christian nationalism. Babington?
Well, so Al, I think the notion is that some people are trying to co-opt the Christian platform to advance their political agenda, you know, and so we need to be aware of that and mindful of that. But there's so many insidious things that are being done on this whole issue, and that's another disinformation agenda, the way they're trying to co-opt the Christian principles and say this is the only way you should vote because of that. But there are other things, and if you don't mind, for instance, Pastor Miller, so one of the things that we hear out there is that Black males are now abandoning Kamala Harris, you know, at record numbers and whatnot, you know, and so while there's things within the thing to be attended to, but the thing itself is a distortion in an attempt to divide. But Pastor Miller, even as you began this, why don't you expand a little bit more on what you're seeing, thinking, and feeling?
Yeah, Pastor Miller, again, a Progressive Baptist Church. I think, the whole idea of making America great again, and that being a rallying cry for Black folk, is just absolutely astonishing to me. That any sane Black person who knows a little bit of history will come to the conclusion that actually that's not the program for me. My grandparents grew up in the Deep South. My grandmother was a strong Black woman, on my paternal grandmother, and she insisted on voting and taking whatever test they had for her to take in Jackson, Mississippi. And my grandfather was begging her not to go because he said, I might lose my job. That's the context. I think that every knowledgeable Black person should look at the lens through which we should look at any kind of political program, political agenda. And I think that it is very peculiar that many of our men and many of us are embracing this whole idea. I think what it requires for us to do is we really need to get out there and re-inform our people. So many people have no sense of context, no sense of historical context. We need to remind people of the great debt that we owe our ancestors. That is part of the discussion. We also have to be very sympathetic. We have to listen to what people are saying, their understanding of what it means to be true to their faith, to listen sympathetically and to offer meaningful responses, but to enter into larger dialogue and conversation. That might mean having more forums, even beyond the election, in our churches, where we're actually having political forums, where we're actually helping redefining or defining what it means to be a Black in America and what have you. I do think that this is the beginning of something, and it is a tipping point for the Black community. We're becoming more and more divided, and we need to come back to our roots. So,
and Al, so we have this extraordinary mix of pastors, even on this occasion, and Pastor McDavid, who is maybe 4 years or so, 3 or 4 years in Minneapolis, doing extraordinary work at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. But the other thing he brings to the table is he perhaps is a bit younger. Well, he's younger than I am anyway. I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but and has an ear, I think, and a voice that we really need to hear. And I wonder if you want to just say more, Pastor McDavid.
What I'll say from my vantage point and demographic is that Pastor Miller's point about being sympathetic and leaning into that space is extremely necessary in this conversation. Because I think, unfortunately, as we hear a lot of the reaction to Black men or working class Black folks, right, making a rightward drift, a lot of people are reducing to the language of shame and belittling. And I always believe that shaming people or insulting people is never going to change their view of philosophy, right? We need to do exactly what Pastor Miller said, come back to that point of re-engaging in these spaces. I believe we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? And so we have to, yes, of course, have the dialogue about how dangerous, right, this current right-wing MAGA movement is. And at the same time, we can chew gum and have the reality to talk about what have been some of the concerns with the Democratic Party and how have people not necessarily seen improved outcomes. A lot of us on this call, we're very privileged. If we look back over the generations, we can see from the moment the Civil Rights Act was signed until now, our own families may have had a great upward trajectory. But we also know people in our communities, in our context, who have not seen that great improvement from 1964 to 2024. And if we're honest about that and the way in which now our Black community is imitating some of the same wealth inequality that we've seen in other communities, then we have to definitely lean in with a sympathetic ear and begin to address, why do you feel neglected? Why are you disillusioned with the Democratic Party? How do we allow, right, the folk that Shemeka is working with to better engage our community in more active dialogue, so they're not just popping in a church at the last minute before the election cycle, but we are having real significant dialogue that makes people feel cared for. Because otherwise, if we just dismiss them as saying, oh, they're a fool who fell for disinformation, or shame on them for being a Black person who's going in this way, right, that's never going to win anybody back to the table of dialogue. And so we really have to be careful with our tone and our rhetoric. And the last thing I'll say is ultimately we need to remember that while our community is very significant in this conversation, at the end of the day, I never want us to lose track of the way in which white women are the key demographic that's going to shape how this election plays out on a national scale.
That's right.
If we create a narrative that blames young Black men without focusing on white women in suburban populations and their responsibility, then we're doing a disservice to our own people.
Let's sit with that a little bit more, if you would, Pastor McDavid and others. This idea of white women being a significant demographic in this outcome. And so politics is a question of organizing interest. And under what scenario is the freedom and advancement of Black people in the interest of white women? Now, I can answer that, but I want to hear us discuss it.
McKinley Moore is an expert on this issue.
Yes, sir. No, sir. I claim no expertise in any area. Superintendent McKinley Moore, Jehovah Jireh Ministries in Brooklyn Center. But I think somehow, we've gotten to a place where we thought, foolishly, I guess, that America had progressed along racial divides and places. And then Trump kind of gave a great awakening that half of the country is really where he is. And so we're being pulled, like I said, make it great again. We're being pulled backwards to a place where we should accept less than, or less than what we should be as a people. And so, but as far as white women kind of being the deciding factor, for the election, I think again we're hearing a lot of conversation and accusation, but I think what we do makes the difference. And so I think we should be about doing what we need to do, and not be concerned about what others are just talking about or trying to get us to believe. Actions speak louder than words.
Al, I hope we can circle back to some other points, but you had brought Shemeka into the conversation earlier. Shemeka with Strong Roots Foundation is a partner with us in helping to promote information distribution and some events. And so before we go further, do you mind if Shemeka could talk about, we're doing some souls to the polls, we're doing registration, we're doing get out the vote and whatever. So Shemeka, could you kind of outline some of those things that we're going to be involved in, that we want everybody to be aware of and involved in?
Absolutely. Yes. So similar to how Pastor Miller, if I can just echo on that a little bit, similar to how he talked about, family from the South. I too was raised in the South. And so, if you're familiar with the souls to the polls concept, it originated in the South. And I think that all of you are alluding to that in your remarks, but I think it's so important that the conversations do continue like year round and not just election season. I know for me personally, being in like that younger demographic, being raised in the South, it's not an option to vote. Like I have to vote because my grandparents would be rolling over in their grave. Like, we did not raise you to not vote. You got to get with it. And so I think sometimes, similar to what you all were mentioning, like those conversations year round is important, because if you don't feel that burden and you don't understand the importance behind why you have to vote, it just seems like something you're just doing. So anyway, to get to the events that are happening. So Souls to the Polls, these next 2 Sundays are the 2 voting Sundays in Minnesota for the election. And so specifically in Hennepin County and in Minneapolis, you can vote on Sunday these next 2 coming weeks, which are the 27th and the 3rd. And then in Ramsey County, they have 1 voting Sunday, which is November 3rd. And so in Minnesota, this has been going on for a number of years. Again, Souls to the Polls kind of originated in the South, but it's really just a movement that is a collective way of promoting civic engagement. So it's where the Black church gets together, the nonprofits, the for-profits, all of the different businesses and people, but it is rooted and based in the church and faith-based community, and get together and do a big civic push for engagement on those days. And so we do have a couple of events coming up, both this Sunday and next Sunday. The churches are pushing Souls to the Polls Sunday, so they will be talking about being civically engaged at church. And then we also have a block party both of those Sundays that's happening from 12 to 3 that will be taking place at URock in North Minneapolis. And
Where is that?
Yep, that is over right on Plymouth Avenue. And I know that we have the graphic that I believe they're going to put up too that has the address and all of that on it. But it's from 12 to 3. The idea behind that is it's after service for most of our churches that are in the community. There's a small speaking segment that's a part of that, where some of our faith leaders will be speaking, along as some of our community leaders as well. And the Urban League is an early voting location. And so you can vote at the Urban League on those 2 Sundays between 9 and 3. And so again, it's just a concentrated effort to try to get people out to the polls. As some of our churches are doing rides to the polls for their members that day, they're doing rides even leading up to that day. And so again, 12 to 3 on the 27th and on the 3rd. Yep.
And the Urban League is at Penn and Plymouth in North Minneapolis. Shemeka, do we know in St. Paul what location is viable?
We do. St. Paul has a number of locations for theirs, but I'll tell you in just a second the name of it. I don't want to butcher the name of that community space that they have. So all of these things, and I'll make sure that I share it in the comments with the live stream that Al McFarlane that they have, but all of the voting information, if you go to mnvotes.org, it takes you to the Secretary of State's website. You can put in your exact address and it will tell you exactly where you're supposed to vote. But in Ramsey County, it's the Ramsey County Elections Office. So that's the Plato building. Any Ramsey County resident can vote there. So whether you're in Maplewood or Rosemount, all those different areas can vote there. And then they do have a number of pop-up additional early voting centers, similar to like the Urban League for North Minneapolis. They have the Arlington Hills Community Center. They have Frogtown. They have the Ramsey County Library, which is in Roseville. And then they have the Ramsey County Library, which is in Shoreview. So each of those places have a number of different locations. When you go to the website as well, for Minneapolis specifically, there's 11 different pop-up locations that are happening throughout the month of October. So you can vote at like the Capri Theater on one of the days. You can vote at Fairview Park. So there's a number of different locations that are accessible to people that people can get to vote. There's a number of resources there for rides to the polls. I know sometimes there are people that need accessible rides, like where it can fit a wheelchair, things like that. There's resources for stuff like that. And so my goal is really just to be here and to be a resource alongside the churches and pastors and be helpful with that information.
So Al, can I mention another area of extreme concern and ask Dr. Gill to comment on it as well? And that is this disinformation campaign that is both local and international. There are international players that are concerned about the outcome of the United States election, and they are taking advantage of issues to separate and divide us. And another component of this, McDavid needs to really be alerting people to this because he can speak with more authority. But this AI, this artificial intelligence thing that is being used to manipulate images and voices and information, this is like the war between darkness and the light in terms of trying to have us all either underestimate the importance of our voting or misunderstand how we should vote. And I don't know, Gill, if you have any particular thoughts in this regard.
Again, for me, it goes back to being clear and having a firm hold on our own history and our culture and our heritage, where we have come from, who we are, and the fact that we do matter here in the United States. For me, being a Christian, and for me, yes, I'm a firm believer of the principle that is found in the Gospel of John, the 17th chapter, which basically speaks about, yes, we are in the world, but we are not of it. But that does not mean that the world itself does not exist, or therefore it should be annihilated. Okay, and that, from what I'm picking up, is the mindset of this right move of the Christian right, and some would even go as far as to say the Christian nationalism. It's like annihilate everybody else that does not think like me. I mean, when you get down to the heart of it, when you look at their behavior and the laws that are being passed, they will do nothing short of just that.
Let me jump in, Dr. Gill. Let me say that I, in my reading and talking with colleagues, the question of civil war has actually come up, and it seemed preposterous at first. But I think I've heard it enough now where some in that side have decided that the Civil War that was fought 100 years ago isn't over, and there's an intent for that South, and that South has nothing to do with geography. It's about the mind and the spirit.
About the mindset.
That South will rise again, and that I think is a problem. What do you think?
I agree with you. It's a mindset piece, and I'm not saying that everybody that does not look like me is of that mindset. I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
But what I am saying is that mindset does exist. That I will say. But at the same time, I need to go back to my earlier comment, is that the person that's going to ultimately sit in that Oval Office, they must be concerned about the entire population of the United States of America. And there must be justice and fairness for all. I realize that some might say, Gill, that's just a fairy tale land, but that's what we ought to be striving toward. We may not be there yet. I share with my church all the time is that we ought to be striving toward being better tomorrow than we were today.
We're close to the end. Let me ask Reverend McDavid to weigh in on AI and young people in particular, the new age techies. How do we mobilize and deliver the power of their understanding and their capacity through technology to build a future that allows us to win? What do you think?
Al, those are the two parallels we're working on, especially at Fellowship. It's first to have the conversation with everyone to know, begin to ask the question when you see information, who is paying to make you or convince you to think in a particular way? Who would want you to see and understand or interpret this image that way, so we can look beyond what's being just handed to us and not accepting everything as fact. But then also, exactly to your point, Al, making sure that we're equipping our young people. They are talented, they are capable, they've got expertise and curiosity in technology, and they should be in front of all the platforms and getting to know everything possible so they can have a whole new set of career opportunities and possibilities beyond what we could have imagined. And so that's the work that we're excited about continuing to invest in, and always glad to have a continued conversation about how we can prepare our young people for a successful career.
Babington, got 30 seconds. Final thoughts. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for bringing these leaders, these voices together.
Well, thank you again, Al, for the institution that you are in our community and allowing us to have meaningful dialogue. We have such a desperate need to inform our community that they might be empowered to act on their own behalf. So thank you for allowing the opportunity.
Gentlemen, thank you. Shemeka, thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Bye.